Hello and welcome to the Franz van Kat interview. I'm Annette Young. For Iran watchers, it's been a busy few days. On Friday, of course, we saw the Iranian parliamentary elections, whose results have favoured the allies of the country's supreme religious leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. This, of course, comes at the expense of the President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. But it also comes as Israelis and Americans are furiously debating what indeed are the red lines when it comes to the contentious nuclear program that Iran is so intent on pursuing. Joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Karim Sajjanpour. He's a policy analyst at the Carnegie Endowment. Karim, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
First of all, let's start with the Iranian parliamentary election results. As we know, there's not much love lost between the Supreme Leader and the President. So where do these results leave President Ahmadinejad? I mean, has he effectively become a bit of a lame duck president between now and when he's supposed to step down next year?
President Ahmadinejad has certainly been weakened as a result of these parliamentary elections. Iran has essentially become a one-party system, and that's the party of the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei. Khamenei, through his control over the parliament, through institutions like the Revolutionary Guards, has become a monarch of sorts. And that said, I think it's in Khamenei's interest to weaken Ahmadinejad, but at the same time keep him on life support. He doesn't want to do anything that would totally humiliate Ahmadinejad and maybe cause him to lash out, because Ahmadinejad has shown himself to be a very unpredictable maverick, and he has dirt on folks within Khamenei's inner circle, and in the past he's shown himself willing to fling it. So again, I think that this parliamentary election, essentially, with this parliamentary election, what Khamenei essentially did was render what was already a rubber stamp parliament into an iron stamp parliament.
But it does seem that the Ayatollah has received an ironclad majority that he needs not only to weaken the president's position, but to eliminate it altogether.
I think that remains to be seen. There is some talk right now that Iran would like to eliminate the position of presidency, and one of the reasons why they would like to do that is because they want to avoid another presidential election. Presidential election, as we saw last time in 2009 with the massive anti-government protests contesting Ahmadinejad's tainted victory, tainted re-election. Presidential elections are a time in which Iranians can take to the streets, the population gets animated and exercised, and they certainly want to avoid that. So if Khamenei has a loyalist parliament, one of the things they're talking about doing is essentially appointing the head of the parliament as a prime minister of sorts and eliminating the presidency altogether. But I don't think any firm decisions have been taken yet along those lines.
But on a domestic front, how will things effectively change as a result of these elections?
To be honest, I don't think there's going to be a discernible difference in the aftermath of these parliamentary elections. On the domestic front, Iran is going to continue to be repressive, authoritarian regime headed by the Supreme Leader in partnership with the Revolutionary Guards. That really doesn't change. And when it comes to Iran's external policies, whether the nuclear issue or its ambitions in the Middle East, the parliamentary results are not going to change them.
And what does it mean for the reform movement? I mean, is life going to be made that much more difficult, given that it seems like the political spectrum has swung even more further to a hardline stance?
Well, my line about the ideological spectrum in Iran is that it now ranges from pitch black to dark gray. And in that spectrum, there's really no room for reformists. And I think that Iranian reformers probably a couple of years ago came to the realization that it's not going to be possible to reform the system from within. At the same time, they're averse to calling for a revolution. So the reformists in Iran have really reached a dead end because, they can't reform the system from within, but they don't want to overthrow it. So I think they're struggling to understand what to do next.
Karim, now swinging our attention to foreign policy, the Ayatollah has made it very clear all along that he has a very confrontational stance when it comes to the West. And certainly this doesn't bode well in terms of how Iran will deal with the West's demands for it to seize its nuclear program, I assume.
I think one of the great challenges in dealing with Iran is the fact that anti-Americanism has become an inextricable part of the Iranian regime's identity. For someone like Ayatollah Khamenei, hostility towards the United States was one of the pillars of the 1979 revolution. And that makes it very difficult if you're the United States and you want to try to resolve your conflicts with Iran diplomatically, because the Obama administration tried to reach out to Iran. It offered the Islamic Republic unprecedented overtures which weren't reciprocated. So I think that engagement didn't prove to be successful. At the same time, the U.S. government is averse to a policy of containment. The Israelis are certainly averse to a policy of containment. And I think that no one here in Washington wants military action. So it leaves you really in a bind in terms of your policy options.
Is there a danger, given that the Iranian economy is grinding to a halt thanks to these crippling sanctions, that the regime in Tehran might start to think they've got absolutely nothing to lose and act in a highly provocative fashion?
Well, the sanctions combined with domestic mismanagement and corruption have certainly deteriorated people's quality of life in Iran. But I think the one saving grace of the sanctions and the overall atmosphere of tension for Iran is the fact that oil prices have gone up significantly. So despite the fact that Iran is increasingly weakened by sanctions and it's increasingly difficult for them to export their oil, what they're able to get in terms of oil prices is much higher. So I think that this combination of repression and high oil prices can buoy the regime for I think longer than people think. But it is true that under this type of pressure, external pressure, internal discontent, that the Iranian regime's back is increasingly up against the wall. And I see two options for the supreme leader in terms of seeking some type of relief. Option one is some type of a nuclear compromise, which for a variety of reasons he's averse to. And option two is to actually pursue a nuclear weapon, which would provide them some type of a shield of immunity. But I think people don't realize that Iran is actually much further away from being able to obtain a nuclear weapon than people think. It's not a matter of months, we're talking about a matter of years.
Now, President Obama has certainly made it clear that he doesn't like this sort of loose talk of war by both the Israelis and his Republican rivals. Do you think both parties are listening to what he's saying?
I don't think that the Israelis will cease talk of military threats because I think that it does a couple of things for them. One, it hopefully they believe has an effect on Iranian calculations, which so far hasn't been the case. But two, I think the Israeli mindset is that the threat of war strengthens coercive diplomacy. What that means is that countries around the world like China, like Russia, European countries who don't want to see military action are more willing to sign up to tougher coercive measures in the form of sanctions and pressure against Iran in order to avert some type of a military confrontation. And in an election year here in the United States, I think there's no chance that the Republicans are going to cease talk of military action simply to placate President Obama. I think that's been one of the Republican strategies on foreign policy, is to paint President Obama as weak on Iran. So despite the fact that, as President Obama said, the talk of war arguably has only benefited Iran because it's spiked the price of oil and it's distracted attention away from the Iranian government's internal abuses. I think that war talk is unlikely to stop.
Karim Sajjanpour, I'm terribly sorry, that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for being with us. And that's it for this edition of the Frans van Kat interview. Stay tuned for more news and headlines, which are coming up very shortly.